Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, on behalf of the First Congregational Church of Old Lyme, it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this lecture from Earle Williams in celebration of his new exhibit at the Florence Griswold Museum. I am very pleased to welcome all of you as guests, but in particular, I wish to single out Joshua Torrance and Amy Kearse-Lansing and Jenny Parsons and David Rao, who have helped put this event together. We are really grateful to join with all of you in hosting this event, and we are even more grateful for the relationship that we share along the north-south axis that is Lime Street. So it really is a deep honor for us. And then Williams, we are honored by your presence within the sacred space of this meeting house. These are walls that speak, walls that talk. And from this time forward, your witness and your testimony and your aesthetic vision are going to be an important voice reverberating within this space. And then I want to single out one additional individual, and I'm sure I'm not going to be the last to do so, whose work has served as an inspiration for this exhibition, and indeed for much of the Old Lyme community over the past several years. I'm speaking, of course, of Carolyn Wakeman. So inspired by Carolyn's work, our church, along with the Flo Grizz and the Phoebe Griffin Noyes Library and the public schools, have engaged in a multi-year partnership to lift up and to commemorate the lives of those who were enslaved here in Lyme and Old Lyme. And it's Carolyn's work and Carolyn's vision that has really transformed much of the town, but the direction of our congregation. So Carolyn, I really want to thank you for that. You need no welcome here, really, because this is one of your homes. But I say it all the same, welcome, but really thank you. I'm going to turn it over now to Joshua, and I'll let you do the rest of the honors, but please know how grateful we are to have all of you in this space, and how grateful we are to be able to host you, Earle Williams. And we're looking forward to what you have to say to us. Joshua.
Well, good afternoon. I'm just so honored to be in this space with all of you today. I believe that museums have the power to change the world. And they change the world through the building of community. And I think the Florence Griswold Museum is really the epitome of a museum that is building community that all of you have played a part in. And we at the museum want to thank all of you in attendance today for your support, for your enthusiasm, and for being such a wonderful audience for our exhibitions and our programs. We do it because we love it, we do it for you, but we can't do it without you. And so thank you, and applause, actually, to all of you for all of your support. I'm going to introduce Jenny Parsons, but I want to first also have some thanks to Jenny, of course, to David Rao for all of his work on today's program, to Amy Kearse-Lansing, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help with this exhibition, and of course to Carolyn. It is truly an honor to be able to work with you. I get inspired by what you do. We happen to both be historians and love archives, so we have a commonality there. But you know, from the day I came to the museum, Carolyn has been such a strong advocate of the power of history, and as a historian, I just love that. And so thank you for all that you do. And of course, we want to thank William E. Williams, a fellow Warren, Ohio guy. Yes, great town of Warren, Ohio. But thank you for being here and for opening us to a broader perspective that we all need, and it's so important. It's been so fun working with you, and I know just hearing from Jenny, all the joy you've brought to this whole community is really just amazing. So, with no further ado, Jenny Parsons, our curator of the exhibition.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to warmly welcome all of you and to thank you so much for being here. I have some brief remarks before I introduce William Williams. It has been a tremendous privilege to work with William over the past 2 years. I remember the exact moment when I pictured William as the museum's third artist in residence. I was sitting in a dark bedroom holding my 6-month-old daughter who had fallen asleep in my arms. I opened Instagram on my phone and I saw that Earle Williams had commented on my recent social media post about the installation of witness stones on the museum's front lawn. He shared that he had taken photographs in Old Lyme, on Lime Street, that are marked by the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and my jaw dropped. I was already familiar with William's work, probably through our Philadelphia connections. In the coming days, I learned more about William's many connections to this area. His Yale degree, that he was mentored by Walker Evans, who had a home in this town, and it felt like the most ideal opportunity to invite him back and to commission him to create new work. In time, I would find out that not only is William an amazing photographer, but he is an extraordinary person, kind and generous, such a hard worker. This was truly a curator's jackpot. But why do we do this work at the museum? Since 2019, the Artist in Residence program at the Florence Griswold Museum, which is affectionately also known as Flo Grizz, continues the legacy of Florence Griswold by welcoming contemporary artists to our site and encouraging them to be inspired by the landscape. William's work gives us the opportunity to delve into the history of the land and the stories of the generations prior to the arrival of the Lyme art colony. This work had been initiated years earlier by historian Carolyn Wakeman, you've heard about, who co-founded the Old Lyme chapter of the Witness Stones Project, which commemorates the more than 300 people who labored in this town between 1670 and 1826. We at the museum are so grateful to be part of this partnership in the community. There are so many people to thank who contributed to this truly collaborative project. I won't list them all now since we all want to hear from William, but please know that there are true heroes who contributed to this project. Huge efforts were made by museum staff and our extended family of contractors, notably our framer, Mara Beckwith, and our designer for the project, Jenny Chan. So many community members also contributed in large and small ways, and every gesture was truly appreciated. This spring, we will publish a catalog distributed by Wesleyan University Press, so please look out for it in the museum shop and online. I'm going to read William's biography, and then I want to say just one more thing. Earle Williams is the Audrey A. and John L. Dussault Professor in the Humanities, Professor of Fine Arts, and Curator of Photography at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. His photographs have been widely exhibited, including in group and solo exhibitions at the Cleveland Museum of Art, George Eastman House, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the National Gallery of Art Washington, Smith College, and more. His work is represented in many public collections, such as the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and many more. Williams has received fellowships from such organizations as the Pew Fellowships in the Arts, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. William made over 2,000 photographs as artist in residence here in Old Lyme and Greater Connecticut. We could have made probably 10 exhibitions with this material. During one of William's visits, he observed, quote, "Old Lyme is an every village story, but it's also so specific. That's where history lives, in the specific. My photographs show people what they are accustomed to seeing in a new light," end quote. I began these remarks with a memory of receiving William's first message to me while I was holding my sleeping baby daughter, and she's 4 years old now. Over the course of this project, William became a grandfather with his first grandchild. And so I asked, why do we do this work? Well, for me, one answer to that question is for the next generation, so that they can have access to a fuller story. And I can't imagine a more beautiful way to learn that history than through William's photographs. So please join me not only in welcoming, but also thanking Earle Williams for his incredible contributions.
I speak. Again, as you've heard from a number of people at the Griswold Museum and also the pastor of this church, it's a great welcome to see all of you here this, I guess I was going to say evening, but it's afternoon, so I'll get my time right. So what I'm going to do is share a little bit about my biography that you may not have been aware of through Jenny's introduction, and also talk about the project a little more than you've heard already. And I'll just get right into it, and I'll show you some interesting photographs. Now, these are both pictures of me. One is by Don Camp. Don Camp is one of the great portraitists of blackness. And what I mean by that is he's photographed a series of black people, both sex, and he's used a special process. These pictures are made with mud that's been chemically treated to make it photographic. And in the process, it's a resist process, so the things that are very thin get washed away. So it's almost a sort of shadow is left. So that's his portrait. And then you see me in glorious color on the other side. And that's probably me in my curator outfit. So just to let you know, we curators are not dull. And the next set of pictures is me as a very young person. I believe I'm 23 here, when I met Walker Evans, who you all are quite aware of. And I was just thinking back on this. I've been taking photographs for 2.5 years when I met him to show him my work, which, looking back on it, was probably a very naive thing to do. But somehow or other, that initial meeting was very meaningful to, I think, to both of us. And I'm going to show you the cameras that I use. So I use a wide-angle Rolleiflex. This camera was developed by Rolle, a German company, in 1959. And it went into production in 1961, and then went out of production in 1964. So there are about 4,000 of these cameras that exist. And the one that I had was supposedly owned by a photographer named Slim Aarons, who became very well known, a society photographer for photographing. His main client was Town and Country. And I used to follow his work every month in Town and Country. And then I was offered this opportunity to buy his cameras, his Rolle Wide and his Rolle Tele. So I did that. And the other camera, right here, the other camera is it's a Hasselblad, and it's a Hasselblad very wide. So the vision is about from this pole there to that pole. And it's very, very wide. And I use that for almost exclusively for all the pictures on this project. And I'll explain to you why in a bit. Now, I also want to share with you some work that may seem atypical, but it's a project that I was involved with right out of Yale Graduate School, 1978. Started at Haverford College, and in '79 I started photographing people at parties, and I used that Rolle for that. And the result of that was a book that was published in 2020, and the book launch party was February 11th. So the book didn't go very far, but it was a culmination of many, many years of photographing parties. And the picture that you see up there is a very famous person. If you're in the transgender world, you would know that's Rachel Harlow. And then you would probably know on the other side of celebrity Brooke Shields, and she was a student at Princeton. And probably the people on the other side of the screen, you wouldn't know them at all, but they are in the beauty business, or they were in the beauty business. And this was a hairdressing show in New York at the Roseland Ballroom, which I believe is now closed, but it was a very famous site in New York. And as you can see, the pictures are made with a strobe light. And I'll talk a little bit more about the strobe light later. And again, another celebrity, and what would typically happen at a party when people are always rushing, and you get these amazing juxtapositions of things. So that's one. But these pictures are all significant because they deal with a kind of moment. That's what photography is. It's very situational. The thing that you photograph can only happen at the moment that it is. So you're always, there's always a sense of time, and that time can be a metaphor or it can simply be temporal. And as an artist, you play with both of those. And one of the things that I found out in researching, or that we found out in doing this, I use as a touchstone Alfred Stieglitz's photographs of New York City, because New York for Stieglitz was representative of what was the energy in America at the turn of the 20th century. It was also a subject that he felt could be the theme in American art, which is the American progress. And as you can see, the excavator, and then the other picture is by Paul Strand, and it's an anonymous picture. The person who's being photographed doesn't realize they're being photographed. And that's in an area in New York that also has a very long history of, I guess you would call it of a black neighborhood, the 7 Points neighborhood, which is also in a very notorious slum. But it was one of the original areas settled by black people in Manhattan. Now, here's, most is talking about the modernist strain in photography. You see a picture there by Alvin Colburn. And then in the center is my picture of Wall Street. And on the other side is a very similar picture taken almost in the same area by Walker Evans for a story he did for Fortune magazine. It was called The Market Right. I believe it's from 1947. However, the picture in the center is the Morgan Bank building. It just so happens that it's situated at 23 Wall Street. On the right side of that picture was Thomas Downey's Oyster House. And that Oyster House was the most famous oyster house in New York City. Everybody that was anybody went there. At the same time, it was also an active station on the Underground Railroad. So I was going to show another example, Paul Strand's famous picture of Wall Street. So my reference for that is slightly different, just as it is now with a lot of Stieglitz's pictures of the New York skyline, which interestingly enough, Stieglitz was born in Hoboken, and he made the journey across the Hudson River to New York City. And while he did that, he photographed Lower Manhattan, Wall Street area, which is the original settlement of New York City. And to talk a little bit about what happens with these sites, on the one side is a church, the AM&E Church, which was in Greenwich Village, and also was an active station on the Underground Railroad. It was a black congregation. And what that site looks like today. So you see, they don't bear any resemblance to each other. And so this is what we deal with in this kind of photography, as I mentioned the term time, we also then deal with historical time, the unveiling of what came before, and what's of interest, and what should be preserved. So one of the messages in this is not only all that sense of time, but also what we should be thinking about preserving and what's important. And here we are in 2011, when I was told by the Connecticut official sites for Underground Railroad stations that that's what this property was. Now, it's only through Carolyn Wakeman's research that the house is actually revealed to be a place where people were enslaved. And I thought about that. When I met Carolyn, I thought maybe she was too much of a zealot. In that all I heard was, you know, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I said, well, let's give her a chance. Let's look at it. So, as it turns out, we both looked at this source, and this is Strother's History of the Underground Railroad in Connecticut. And 95% of Strother's is correct. 1% that had to do with Old Lyme is incorrect. We looked at the source for it, for what he used to saying that it was an Underground Railroad route. And that footnote, mysteriously enough, is missing. It's not there. So I think it was at that moment that I started to become a believer in Carolyn. And because, as you probably know, she's a very strong-willed person. And, oops, I hit the wrong button. Am I still where I was? Okay, I want to go forward. Oops, I'm going backwards. Now I think I'm going forward. Okay, so as we heard about Old Lyme and Lyme being a place that is a metaphor for many American villages. Well, the place that you're looking at with the large stripes is the site of David Ruggles' Underground Railroad station, his bookstore, and the place where he lived. So this is what the building looks like today. There's a historic placard there, and you can see just by the Colombo Brewing Place, and then right next to it is a bronze placard, which denotes that that's why the site's important in Tribeca. The other picture are the Twin Towers of Hartford. I would say one is the Travelers Tower, and the other one is the First Congregationalist Church. Now, in both of these pictures, I have done some things that have you focus on that corner site, and then have you look at the towers, and then as well as the tree, because the First Congregationalist Church is where Frederick Douglass made the only place that he would welcome him in Hartford was on the church steps, not inside the church, but outside on the steps, where he could talk about abolitionism. David Ruggles, his family is from Connecticut, and if you were in the show, you could see where his relative, that spot is in the show, or the place where the house was. I was told, again by one of the informants here, that house, the modern house, the original house is inside of that shell, so that foundation and all that still stands. So here's a local story. David Ruggles, another important part of him I'll get to in a bit, and also Frederick Douglass. The Customs House in New London. And another thing that I did here was I could not photograph the entire Customs House because of where it's located. And so I decided to work for a significant detail. And with the wide-angle camera, I was able to get both of those bronze parts or signs on either side of the door and make a composition that way. And then on the inside, I was able to rest my camera on a case and point it into the room where the Amistad exhibition space is. So that meant that I could do the floor and I could do the ceiling and the walls to give a sense of three-dimensionality. So in one place I'm working flat, the other place I'm working three-dimensionally to give a sense of what the place is. So I think this is really nice, like you can outside, inside. So this is another thing that I work with. I think all the things I'm showing you that are not in the show are part of my collection. I have a large collection of African American material, and it's part of my research, and it's also part of like knowing the things that I'm talking about, they exist in the real world. So this is the book of Negro history, and on the other side is Booker Washington, and you can see the reference to Carnegie and Rosenwald is to Booker Washington. And Booker Washington was one of the most effective fundraisers for any kind of institution in the country. He wrote a book about it, which is still, if you read it, it still makes a lot of sense to read how he raised the money for his Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University. It also shows something about any kind of social progress in America. It's always, always, always biracial. It's black and white people working together. And this is what you see there in this history book. And let's see if I can get this to work again. Nope. It's counterintuitive. And this is Harriet Beecher Stowe. And she plays a very important part in American history as well as black history. So I thought it was appropriate that she should be across from this history book. The other thing about Harriet Beecher Stowe is the things that she writes about in Uncle Tom's Cabin are real things. They're not things that she made up. She might have sensationalized them, drawn out on them, and made them and particularized them, but the facts were the facts. And they were, when the book was published, still one of the best-selling nonfiction books ever published in English. Was very upsetting to the larger world. So in that way, she was truly a freedom fighter, and also coming from a long line of abolitionists. So, and this is Jersey City, looking towards Hoboken, looking towards Midtown. And there's my grandson, Aiden. Also looking at me, taking his picture. So, like Aiden, his grandpa's, wants to know stuff, and so does he. So I take him as an inspiration of, how to go about making art. So, and this is the Amistad where it's docked. And as you can see on the other side is the large photographs that are in the gallery that are laid out. These are proofs for them. And you can see there's a check mark. So the check mark is telling us that that's not quite right because it's version 3. So I think we did 6 versions before we got to the one that you're seeing in the galleries. So it just shows you again about the physical labor that goes into making these things. I mean, we've already got to the point where we've chosen them, we've edited them, we've done all that. And now we're at the version of making these prints, so there's a set of proofs of them. So I'd say like to physically make the prints that you see in the gallery, it's about a day to make a print. But when I say a print, it's not like one print. I'm talking about, we make 5 exhibition quality prints. So that's what takes today to make 5 of them. Because I don't want to go back later and make another print, because whatever you're doing at the time, that's what the print is going to look like. You can't make another one that's exactly the same. No matter what they tell you about photography, it's never the same once you get done with that particular time. Even with digital printing, that is another falsehood that, first of all, like once the print comes off the printer, it's ready for you to show or whatever. You need to let the print dry. The ink needs to settle before you start rustling or moving it or any of that. So these are very labor-intensive objects. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on something unless it's really, really worth it. Now, that's just one facet of the practice that we work with. Now, that picture on the Amistad dock, that's a gelatin silver print. So in order to make the digital prints, we do a gelatin silver print, and then we match that tonality digitally, and we use the same paper, Verita paper, that analog gelatin silver prints are for. So we match those surfaces, and then we continue to match till we get a match, or one that I think is right in the spirit. But making something bigger also changes it. So we have to think about that too. And what I wanted to talk about, the Amistad was this ship, a schooner or sailing ship, a large one. The people that were captive took over the ship, and they thought they were sailing it back to where they had been captured and enslaved, but instead the captain and the navigator were taking them towards New York State. Now, the interesting thing about this, one picture, as you can see, is in Jamaica. And there was a slave rebellion there. That's what that picture is about. It's about the enslaved people taking over the fort that was commanded by the British and turning that gun on them. It's a huge artillery piece. So both cases, one in North America and one in Jamaica, the story's the same. And so this is one of the things that I've been working on. I've traveled around the Western world photographing these kinds of stories that don't get told. In Jamaica, this is an overrun site that you have to really spend some time to get to. And in New Haven, the replica of the Amistad is only there at a certain time. So when I was there, it wasn't there. But when I was in Barbados, it was there. And interesting, I'll just take one more moment and recognize Bill Pinkney, who was instrumental in getting the Amistad replica built. He's the first black person, he's one of the few people that's ever circumnavigated the southern hemisphere alone. So he's a master mariner. So he was sailing this as a principal captain of the ship to demonstrate and educate people around the Caribbean and North America. And so that's another form of activism. It's another form of keeping the memory alive. And again, this is, again, the Amistad story. And then on the, guess it's my right, is the 7-star, the North Star pub. This is where Thomas Clarkson got the first information about the slave ships, about how bad they were. It was in that pub. On the other side is in Farmington, Connecticut. That's near a grave of one of the Mende, who is said to have drowned, but it's more likely committed suicide, spot near there. So both the pictures when I tell you the story, they look slightly different. I always think that one looks like a nice landscape and the other one looks like an Atche. French photographer who is the icon of modern photography. A whole nother story there, but this is shows you, like, I use the iPhone a lot. I used to take Polaroids, but Polaroid they don't make film anymore. They've gone into a different place, and then write down where things were. Now the iPhone, you can do that. It gives you the exact plot where you were. It names all the ancillary streets, records the date, so it's great. And also, as you can see, the iPhone is super wide angle too. Even when it's normal, it's very wide. And so it's much wider than my camera. And so you can see I made certain adjustments in the black and white of that scene of working with the pattern of the sidewalks. Where my picture's taken in black and white is on the other side of that building, which is Connecticut Hall, which was built with enslaved labor. This is another example of the study picture and then the actual photograph of a place that had such enormous wealth. The Wolf family, who were also the family originally from Old Lyme. And they were some of the largest slave traders in North America. They also had a thriving rum business, distillery on the other side of the street there where the docks are, which I'll show you some pictures later. Those are all in the exhibition. This is a house right across the street. It's the parsonage for this church. And the other picture is a picture made in Boston about 74, this picture is made with a 4x5. And you can see it's super, super sharp. Camera's on a tripod. And at the time, this is the oldest wooden house in Boston. And it's also historically the black section in Boston on Beacon Hill. I have a city directory that tells me who lived there at that time. So, and this is near where we lived on Beacon Hill. So I walk by this all the time. I started my career in insurance, an insurance adjuster. And then later I decided I'd be a bartender. And then after graduating from bartending school, I decided to work at the Boston Public Library, BPL. So every day going to the BPL, I would walk by here. And one day I decided to photograph this house. And later on, I learned this whole area was a black neighborhood. There's an active stations on the Underground Railroad in this area. It's right in back of the Copley estate. When I say that, the land that painter John Single Copley owned, he owned the front side of Beacon Hill, adjacent to the State House. It was all his property. And that's what allowed him to paint, because he was a very wealthy man, so he could paint. And this is a scene, this is not in the show, but this is Lieutenant River outside the museum. And this would have been the route for the Caribbean trade, i.e. the merchandise going to the Caribbean to support the plantation system. Because the people down there that owned the plantations were so busy, they were making so much money that they had to import all their foodstuffs from someplace else. And Lyme, what we now know as Old Lyme, was one of the principal areas where that was done. And this is part of Carolyn's research. Were not for her, this would not be known in such microscopic specificity that this was a route right by the museum. It's also one of the favorite places for the Lyme School art. And on my right there is the place It's a fort, and it's in Trinidad. That was where the sugar ships went out and they came in, and it was guarded by this fort. And I happened to be on a beautiful, as the sun was setting. And you see both of the pictures, the theme is water, but when you know the context of it, it's slightly different. Now, that's Ely's ferry landing there. And then on the right here is where the AM&E Episcopal Church was. That was an active station on the Underground Railroad. Now you can see the St. Louis Arch. And where this is actually taken was in the parking lot of the baseball stadium. So again, like what happens with spots over time. And this is where John Brown was an active customer at Collins and Company. 2 sites of the factory. I was talking to some people earlier, and they said, yes, this is where we do our antiquing. And that is what the spot is known for today, but when John Brown was around, it was one of the best foundries in the country. And that's where he contracted to have the pikes that were going to be used in liberating the slaves in the Harper's Ferry area. So, and this is our church where we're in today. And what I tried to do here was incorporate the witness stones. As you can see, they're in the first picture, but it's microscopically so in the second picture. One of the things I don't like to do is have my shadow in the photograph. But in order to photograph the witness stones, my shadow had to be in the photograph. And so what I decided to do was double down. So I worked with the shadows, which you can't see, that hold up the chain. And I photograph the chain, and my shadow breaks the chain. And then in the second part of the shadow, it forms a continuation with it. And then there's the witness stones. So I made a very symbolic image, metaphoric image of something that I don't like to have happen. But in this case, I said if I were going to photograph the witness stones, I'd have to do that. So this is another sense of very situational. And I also wanted to enforce the idea that the parking spots and then where the witness stones are laid, and then the church itself, it's a continuous ocular experience. All those things are together. And so it's in this way that we think about constructing visuality. Oops. And you know, one of the things that when you're an artist, there are always people that are your mentors. So I'm going to talk about 2 of my mentors. One is very well known, and the other one is practically unknown. And this is the 1934 issue of Hound and Horn. As you can see, there are 2 names there, Walker Evans and Sylvia Saunders. Now, everybody knows who Walker Evans is today. If you don't, you should. It's like eating Wheaties. Have your Wheaties. And opening up Hound and Horn, you'll see there's a picture of the United States Hotel by Sylvia Saunders. So Sylvia Saunders, her sister Olivia Saunders married James Agee. That was Agee's first wife, was Olivia Villa, who went to Bryn Mawr College, graduated from Bryn Mawr. I think she was a class of 24. And she was chaperoned to the site to photograph with Walker Evans. That must have been a trip. You know, so Walker is there, Sylvia's there, and her mother is there. And they're photographing the United States Hotel. And really, Sylvia's pictures are quite good. And these are Walker's pictures. One is from the magazine, and the other one is a picture from the negative that I gave to my alma mater, Hamilton College. And I gave it in honor of Sylvia Saunders. And I did that because if I hadn't met Sylvia, I would probably never have known about Walker Evans, because she introduced me to his work. And that introduction was to be very important later. Oops. You can do interesting things with this. I'm slightly dyslexic, so everything is backwards to me. This is a show that I just have curated at Haverford. Now, my wife is looking at this and she's saying, why are you showing this? Well, I mentioned Flash earlier. I've talked about time. And the person who's most responsible for all of that, Edward Muybridge and Harold Edgerton. And within the show, I have two photographs, one by Larry Fink, and the other by Larry Fink's teacher, Lizette Modell, who was also Dean Arbus's teacher. Now, Larry, I met at Yale, and he's one of my mentors because he liked my work, and many others did not. So he became a friend for life. And Lizette Modell, someone I also met later in her life, her last exhibition, her last public appearance was at Haverford College. So I used those two pictures as an illustration for the effect that Muybridge and Edgerton have had on how we think about photography in terms of time. Because without sequential, fast action photography, and without high-speed stroboscopic photography, the idea of time that Cartier-Bresson talks about, the decisive moment, none of those things could exist because they wouldn't be part of the lexicon of how we think about time and how we think what photography is. Now, some more Edgerton, which actually I was introduced to Harold Edgerton's work by another person who became a Yale classmate, Philip Lorca de Corsia. He had this book by Edgerton. He says, you should look at these pictures. And I looked at them and I was enthralled by them. And of course, you saw my earlier work, party pictures. It's all done with flash. And it's all done on the principle of the unscripted moment. So, and just to again show you how influential this work is, this is Beaumont Newhall's book, 1839 to 1937, which is one of the very first museum shows to show photography as an art form. And he's got Muybridge on the front cover. And this is another preoccupation that I have is the 54th Massachusetts sculpture that when I lived in Boston, I would walk by it every day. And then I got Lincoln Kirstein's book about the monument, which explained what it was and who the 54th Massachusetts people were. I was speaking to someone earlier today, and I said, Denzel, that's who. 54th, Denzel. You know. But one of the things that in doing the Muybridge show that I learned was that one of the original subscribers to Muybridge's motion studies was Augustus St. Gaudens. And I'll show you the statue in a moment, but you see this particular plate here is one that St. Gaudens would have used as a study for his equestrian statue. I happen to own this plate, and I gave it to Hamilton. Now, if you give anything to any museum or you give anything away, you should have good intentions. And then when you find out something that you didn't know about it, it's too late. So when I found, we have all this documentary stuff at Haverford about Muybridge, but I never actually read the prospectus that has St. Gaudens as one of the original subscribers. So I never put the two together. I thought it was probably likely, but there was no proof. So doing the show, I got the proof, and there's my plate that's now in the Welland Museum in Hamilton. Now, here's the St. Gaudens. That's a photograph of it. And there's the collotype study. And you can see in the very first frame there, that's the gait of the horse. Now, St. Gaudens also did a whole series of men holding weapons. And you can trace those weapons the way they're held by looking at Muybridge's images. Now, to my mind, no one's ever written about this aspect of St. Gaudens and Muybridge. Because when you hear about this, it's always Degas and the horse. But I didn't see Degas' name on the original subscribers to Muybridge's animal locomotion studies. So research can take you in funny places. Now, to get back, one of the things that you'll find in our show is that there are sites in the show, and there's a history about Native Americans. And in both cases here, the Native people were here way before anyone else. And so the one is a shot of Calves Island on a boat that some people I met very informally invited me to go out on a boat, and we did a cruise around these islands. And this is one of the photographs. It's not in the show. And the other one is a place called Uncas's Leap, which is in Norwich. Excuse me for burping. Which is in Norwich. And it is the place of crossing for the native people. And it was also a site of war. And later, a cotton mill was built there. It was dammed up. So it was, Chief Uncas could never leap across that because the rivers changed substantially. But that's the spot. And I'm glad my wife wasn't with me, because she would have said, don't do it, don't do it. But I'm right on the edge there. You see, that's where the picture's taken, right on the edge. To show this waterfall. Again, water is such a theme, such a powerful theme in all of this work. Now, you know this place, the Griswold Museum. It took, a number of tries to get this picture. Again, the photographs, as I said, they just don't happen. You have to move around the ground. You have to think about, how am I going to photograph something that's in the ground? Like before I showed you, I just went all in and I just put my shadow in it. I did all that stuff. But here I wanted to have the witness stones. I wanted to show this magnificent mansion, and I wanted to make a photograph that you could only use a wide-angle lens with to do it, to incorporate again all those elements, including the clouds, which are really pretty cool. And the clouds are also a reason why the light here is so spectacular, because it's reflecting off the water, it's reflecting off a number of surfaces, so it takes on a three-dimensional quality that it doesn't in a lot of other places. And so I took advantage of all that to make this picture, but there's something very strange about it. And we were talking about it, is that the sidewalk doesn't actually lead you to the front door. It leads you to the bottom step, which is, you'd have to make a correction to get through the door. The other thing that's very peculiar about this is the foreground can't be as big as the house. You see, if you're actually standing there, it's a very short space. And I'm working with the optics of this very wide-angle lens. I'm holding a camera perfectly steady, and I'm making something that doesn't actually exist come into being here. Like if you stood there it would not look like this. So this is why, photographs are photographs. They're actually not reality. They're also not truth either. Now, this is a picture that's taken in England, taken in a very well-known church. And it's a church where there were a number of baptisms of formerly enslaved people who got baptized. Now, why would enslaved people get baptized? The reason for that, to be baptized, is to become part of the legal system. So that's why you got baptized. And you see these children here that are, in this picture, are formerly enslaved. They're also baptized. That's the reason for baptism. It's to get you into the legal system. And let's see. Now, this is Goose Island, and it's taken from a very high vantage point. Again, had some wonderful cooperation from the family that owns this property, this viewpoint. And it's just a magnificent viewpoint. And right next to it is an artist studio. I mean, what a great place to have a studio. I mean, you just sit there and it's sun sets, boom. So I just happened to be there as the sun was setting and the family was returning from a shopping trip. So it just worked out that they were there and I was there, and they were welcoming, and they said, yeah, please. And so I made the photograph. Now, I'm going to go through the next couple pretty quickly because you've heard what I've had to say about how I make the pictures, what the pictures are about, and that the light is significant. So I'm just going to go through these. And take you back to a ruined house where this slave family, they lost everything. And actually the ruins are because they had a terrific party and the place caught on fire and it burned down. And then to show you this place in Bristol, Rhode Island, where somehow the people held on to their money and now it's a museum. And some of the families still live in some of the ancillary houses in the back, say private. But it's an amazing thing. If you go to Rhode Island, they actually have the medallions that say slave site, which I had never seen before. I was astounded by it. And now this is the last one. This is the last Civil War battle, Brownsville, Texas, and that's the battlefield. It looks, just gorgeous. But a lot of people died in that spot right there. So again, as I say, the pictures can be, photographs, but they don't tell you everything. And so there are different layers of recognition, cognition, and it's the artist that hopefully helps you see things that you might not have seen or experiences that you might not have experienced. So I think if we have time, we can take some questions. And I hope the clock on this is wrong because it says this was 112 hours. So yes. Yes.
I heard you say that in the United Kingdom, people who are in the United Kingdom who were enslaved would seek to be baptized in order to get into the legal system. I can imagine advantages of being in the legal system, but could you unpack that a little bit for us, please?
Well, you have legal rights. You could own property. You could vote. You could do all those things. I mean, in fact, the most famous Christian convert was a man named Nicholas Africanus, who was an enslaved person who was presented to Pope Leo, and that's how he got his name, Leo Africanus. He was a nobleman, and once he came in contact with the Pope said, "You have to renounce your Muslim religion, become a Christian, and I will grant you your freedom." Indeed, that's what happened. And Leo Africanus wrote the first geography, which became the first history of Africa. So, and that book was published in, I think, 1425 in Latin, and then it was translated into English, and it became the source for what eventually became the slave trade, because they knew where the Africans were. So that's an irony of it on an irony. But this is an example of what happened, the forceful bending of a native people to a conquering people or a colonializing people's system, is that you have to become part of that system in order to thrive in it. And that's what any of these colonizing countries do, and they do today. You have to do what they say, or you'll just not be there. But that's what the act of baptism means in these cases. And so when I was in England, I went to all of those places, and I photographed them. And I stood there, I was witness to them. I think there's a question in the back. Yes?
You've been all over photographing these sites. Is there one or two in particular that you have found especially moving or evocative?
Well, could I lie to you? Say, some of the most interesting ones are in Lyme. Well, I just pointed out one of the place in Rhode Island, the house, that structure, and then the across the way. I didn't show those pictures, but they're in the exhibition of the wharf where enslaved people were brought across, as well as the ballast stones were used to build a wharf. So you can see at that place you go. You can see these ballast stones. They don't look like the regular stones. They're dark stones. And those are the ballast stones that were used in these slave ships. And they brought the slaves over. They dumped the ballast stones. And then the Wolf family used that to build their wharf, where they put their enslaved people as well as their cargo. So it's one of the most complete sites that there is, because you can see the house that the slave trade built for these people, and it's still there, it still remains. So it's a unique site. So that site I'll never forget because of that. Yes?
So much of your work, it seems like you're kind of in dialogue with the place, thinking back to what has happened before, and you encounter people as you're taking your photographs. Does that then inform what next steps you take with the photos? Like, how is, you're not just sitting there alone with a plan of what to do. It sounds like you're describing to us a process that where you're really interacting with people and the environment. Like, how does that shape the process?
Well, again, it's only part of it. Really, what happens when I'm making the photograph is that I'm looking at it, and generally, I don't photograph when other people are around. I photograph alone. But the being alone, that's being informed by all these other things. And I just contradicted myself, because I said I was on a boat with some people, and I photographed this, and I photographed that. So, believe what you will. Yeah. So, It really depends on how quiet the things were. And these people that were on the boat, they were very quiet. And the other thing that happened, like I was on the boat, I was getting up and down, I lost my wallet. And in losing your wallet, like you're talking about law, well, if you don't have identity, I also had my money in it, credit cards, everything, driver's license. Suddenly, I was a nobody in Old Lyme. And I had all those feelings that you're talking about get projected into the photographs. I had that for a day or for actually a couple hours. But for the most part, the photographs are taken, they're taken alone and they're taken in silence. But there's this mental dialogue that goes along with the things that I know about. As I explained to you about the New York pictures that Stieglitz made, that my original reference for them was that they were examples of modernism and the standard for American art. As I just explained to you about the Muybridge's pictures of the horse in motion, and my obsession with the 54th Massachusetts statue. And then I found something very interesting about it. I know something, as a collector, I would collect more of those horse plates with the gate. Those are the least desirable ones if you're collecting Muybridge. But see, knowing that, what their significance is, I would collect that because I would get a lot of value for what I would expend in price. And this is a little bit about curating, is how you do it, is you learn as much as you can, and then you apply that to acquiring objects that you think are going to tell interesting stories. So in a way, what I'm really doing is I'm doing a kind of curation of sites and places. Now it's interesting, no one's asked me, well, there are no people in your pictures if you're doing all this, history and stuff. Well, in this picture here, like it's this like patterning, it's like a Jackson Pollock, if you could take an example. There's Pollock. That's, for many art historians, now say that that's what his strip paintings are, is that they're inspired by the landscape of where he was out in Southampton or the Springs, looking out at the field in back of his little farm that they had. I mean, you can see that. I mean, in a picture like this. So I was probably thinking I had Pollock in the back of my head someplace. I mean, it's just part of, like, again, that's the other thing. Like, the more stuff you know, the more things you can bring to your pictures. You can't be a dummy and do this. So for anybody that's young, get a good education. It'll pay off, really will. So I bring all these experiences in a kind of, I want to use a big word, but I won't. I just say in a questioning way with what's in front of me and what might happen. Like, just like my little grandson looking at me taking his picture, wondering why you're doing that. What's in it for me? So those kinds of things, that's what's important. Yeah.
I really enjoyed when you talked about how photographers created this time in both the historical sense and the creative sense. And I was curious about, during this project, I know you're pouring a lifetime of research into it, but the residency was only a year. So I was curious about your relationship with time during the production.
The relationship with time?
Your relationship.
My relationship with time? Okay, it was more like, it was actual shooting is it's more like a year and a half. And you're right, I have a lifetime of experience of doing this kind of work. So that speeded up things a lot. But really, logistics for doing a project like this, it should be 4 years. I finished shooting in March of 2024. And I started printing in June of 2024. And all the pictures had to be done, obviously, before the show. And that's 110 photographs needed to be printed from scratch. So how do you do that? Well, I had some really great studio assistants who were able to, I shot on film, then they digitized the prints and corrected the files, and then I worked with them, and then we made the final adjustments so that the files would work the same as a paper print. So I guessed that there would be 450 pictures that my curatorial partners would be interested in. And so 450 files, digital prints, images were made of those 450 pictures that I thought. You heard it was 2,000 that were made. It's more than 2,000. It's closer to 3,000 prints were made, or 3,000 negatives were exposed. And I had my assistants that had them do this in anticipation of what the curators would want. So we finally got the list of what the curators wanted. We already had physical files that could be turned into paper objects, which you need because the other part of the project is the book. So working simultaneously on the digital side, and then hearing what would be needed on the analog side. By the time that came in, we were already well into production in terms of doing an exhibition as well as doing a book, because the digital files are corrected so that they will work in the book. The other thing that I didn't talk about was that all the contact sheets were also digitized, and they were digitized as TIFF files, so they're very dense files. So you could take one little detail, which would be a negative, and blow it up, and it would work as it would work on a website. So there was already a lot of physical images from the project that the curators and the authors of the catalog would have. They would have it, so they already had it. So that just speeds up things all along. The reason that I could do that is because I've done a number of these projects already, and I know what you would need or what you would want, so I anticipated all that. And after anticipating, of course, the curator wants something else. So what that means is that what they might want would be 10% of what's already there. So I could, so we could manage a big project like this because of that. Yes?
Might you be able to share your feelings, not your thinking, like about politics, but about when you were standing in this field of the last battle of the Civil War, how you felt about being in that place? Because it seems to me that I can interpret what I'm seeing in the picture through my own lens, but I'm wondering what you were feeling standing in that spot. Feeling about taking the picture.
Well, this is one thing I've learned, is that in these kinds of spots, you should never think bad things because it will come back on you in significant ways. And I'll give you an example. I was in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, where a number of Confederate soldiers are buried. And I started thinking about all these people as traitors and all this stuff. And as I was thinking that, I was near a large oak tree, and I was thinking those thoughts, and suddenly a big branch from that tree fell right in front of me, and it wiped out about 15 of the stones. It just fell right in front of me. And so I said, wow. You know. And then later I was thinking the same thing down in the Shenandoah Valley about something. And I've wound up running into a fire hydrant that you don't see in your mirror because I was backing up. And I said, you know, I mean, after the second time that happened, I thought, I'm never going to ever think any bad things about anything when you're in these spots. And so when I was in that spot, as you can see, it was a glorious day in Texas. This is where Elon Musk now launches his rockets. It's so interesting that the last battle of the Civil War is where Elon launches his rockets into outer space. So this is, that was one thing. The other thing was a sort of sense of elation that I actually found this spot, because it's on a golf course. And so walking along the golf course, the guy said, well, it's the 9th hole off the tee. And see, that's, the green is right on top of that. It looks like this is really monumental and all that, but it's really little space that, again, I photographed in that way to make a suggestion of finality, and also in this case, I use it as a final picture in this presentation for you, which I can tell you I really worked hard on this. Thank you. So again, thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll go back and see the show, because it's one of those things that it takes a couple times to really ingest everything.